Alright, hi guys. So today, today's video is going to be a redo of a video that I put out last week sometime, I think. I took it down because I realized I had done something wrong in that video. So today I'm going to show you how to do a mag check on a Cessna 172S model, such as this one here in the simulator. And as well, I'm going to show you how to do a mag grounding check, which is separate from the mag check. The mag check is used during the run-up in the before takeoff checklist in the pilot's operating handbook. The mag grounding check is not part of a pre-departure or run-up checklist for the Cessna. So first I'm just going to show you how to do it for those of you who just want to be able to go through the motions, and then at the end of that, once that's completed, I'm going to stop and give some commentary about the two and why it is that we as pilots do a mag check during run-up and what the grounding check is for specifically. Some people have called the mag check at run-up a grounding check, and that's not technically true. It is, but it isn't. I'll just have to explain the difference. So let me just show you how you go about doing this to begin with. So you're going to put the mixture full rich. Let me get this yoke out of the way. And we're going to come right down here. And we're going to bring the engine RPMs up to 1800. Right about there. And we're going to check the right magneto first. Not the left, but the right. So we'll go 2 clicks to the right. There's the right one. We're looking for no more than 150 RPM drop. Then we go back to both. We allow the RPMs to recover. Then we'll go to the left mag. 1 click to the left. No more than 150 RPM drop. And no more than 50 RPM difference between each mag drop. So that's 150, looks like right at 150, so we'll go back to both and let the engine recover. And there's a few other checks that you would do during the run-up portion right here, but this is just for the purposes of the mag check itself. So now we'll pull the power back to 1000 RPMs. That's a mag check. That simple. Now I'm going to show you how to do a magneto grounding check. This is different. So essentially what you're going to do is you're going to pull the throttle to idle, or you can keep the RPMs roughly around 800 RPMs, and I'm going to put them at around 800 RPMs because you can kill the engine doing this. But this is a magneto grounding check. So I'm going to pull the RPMs down to about 800. So almost at idle. And now I'm going to take the ignition switch, the magneto switch, and I'm going to flip from both to off and then back to both as quickly as possible. You don't want to pause in the off position because the engine will shut down. Hopefully I can avoid that. So let's try that. There we go. Watching the RPMs as this happens. See the RPMs drop. I'll do it one more time. You don't want to pause in the off position. Now I'm just flipping it all the way to off and back to both very quickly. I'll do it one more time. The engine almost shut off on me there. Now that's a mag grounding check. I'm going to bring the RPMs up to 1000. We'll hold it there, and I'm going to lean the mixture a little bit because we are setting at about 1000 feet above sea level. Now, that's how to properly do a mag check for the run-up, for the before takeoff checklist engine run-up, as well as a magneto grounding check. Those are two different things. And that's the completion. That's how you do it. So for those of you who just want to know how to properly go through the motions, there you go. The video is done at that point. For those of you who want to stick around for the commentary about it, just stay tuned because I want to explain some of this to you. So in the video that I put out last week, the one thing that I did wrong on the magneto grounding check is I had the engine RPMs up. They should have been down around idle. And that was pointed out to me, so I wanted to change this, and it actually sent me scrambling to the POH for the maintenance section on how you could check this. And I spoke with a AMP mechanic just to make sure. The magneto grounding check is not something that you do often at all, maybe once a month, and it's usually something that, you know, if you own an aircraft, you would probably do it. If you're just renting an aircraft for the day, this is probably not something that you would bother to check, but I'm going to explain the differences here. Try not to get lost in my thoughts. So the mag check itself for the engine run-up. What is a magneto, and why do a mag check in the first place? So first off, a magneto is essentially a self-contained generator that generates a high voltage current that provides ignition to the engine through spark plugs. So when this engine has two magnetos. The engine is running off of the magnetos and not off of the battery, unlike your car. So your car or your pickup truck, once it's running, the sparks are coming essentially from the battery. Well, not in an aircraft like this. Let me show you. I'll turn the avionics off here. As you can see, the engine is running. Let me reach down here and we'll flip the master off, which is both the alternator and battery. There they go. Cockpit is dead, but the engine's still running. That's because the engines are running off of the magnetos, both of them currently, because the ignition switch, or the magneto switch, those terms are kind of interchangeable, is in the both position. So what are we doing during the mag check run-up? Not the mag grounding check, the mag check run-up. So you're trying to check the status of each magneto. So on this engine, there's two sets of spark plugs, one for each magneto. And it's a redundancy system. So your car engine has only one set of spark plugs for each cylinder. Well, this engine has two spark plugs per cylinder. And each spark plug runs off of one or the other of the left or right magnetos. So when you do the engine run-up, what you're checking for is the operation of the magneto and how the engine is running on the spark plugs for that magneto. That's why you check the right and the left, so to speak. You check them individually. You can't check them both at the same time. I say that to say this. To check either the right or the left at any given time, you have to ground the other out. So for instance, if you're going to check the right magneto down here, when you put the ignition switch or magneto switch on the right magneto, that grounds the left one, preventing its operation. And conversely, when you put it on the left one, it will ground the right one. This is why the term magneto grounding check gets thrown around during the run-up procedure, but it's not a magneto grounding check. When you do the run-up, you're not checking to see that each magneto is grounding out. That's not the point of the run-up. The point of the run-up is to check how the magneto is operating individually, both the right and the left, and to see how the engine is running on each set of spark plugs. That's the point of doing it during the run-up. However, a byproduct of doing that is you do have to ground one magneto so that you can check the other. Whether it be right or left, it doesn't matter. But that's not a magneto grounding check. So a magneto grounding check itself is, let me think through this. How do I explain it simply if I can? This engine is running off of magnetos. So if I flip the battery off, the engine continues to run. Well, how do we shut the engine down in the first place? Well, we starve the engine of fuel by pulling the mixture to the idle cutoff position. Well, when you do that, you just starve the engine of fuel. But you have no idea if the magnetos are still hot. So it's in the both position. Now, we've checked both left and right. So there's the right one. that means the left is grounded. We put it back on the left, that means the right is grounded. So each one is working separately, right? Now we put it back to both. But how do we know that both magnetos are grounded when the ignition switch is in the off position? Well, let me just shut the engine down here. Now the engine is off. Now let's turn the ignition switch to the off position. Now how in the world would you know that there's not a problem with this switch right now? And even though the magneto switch is in the off position, if you were to get out and hand prop this aircraft, would the magneto still be hot and the engine take off? You know, you wouldn't want to hand prop it anyways. It's pretty daggone dangerous. And you would want to be thoroughly trained. But essentially that's what hand propping is. You don't need the battery on to operate a starter motor to crank the engine. If you wanted to start this engine by hand propping it, you go through the proper procedures to prime the engine if necessary, and you simply put the ignition switch in both, and someone outside the aircraft can turn the prop as long as fuel is being supplied, and this engine would take off. No battery necessary. The battery is only to power the starter motor for the engine, to crank the engine, essentially replacing hand propping the engine. But if you've ever seen the old black and white videos of the aircraft way back in the day, you know, you see guys hand propping aircraft all the time. Well, that's what that is. Well, there's no test in any of the checklists that tells you definitively that when the ignition switch is put in the off position, both magnetos have been grounded at the same time, not individually, but at the same time. So the magneto grounding check is done with the engine running, flipping from both to off and then back to both. Or you could go from the left mag to off, back to left, or the right mag back to off, back to, or I'm sorry, from right to off, back to right. You know, however, you need to put the switch in the off position and then immediately return it to a magneto. What that's doing is you're looking for the engine to try to die in the RPM drop when the magneto switch is placed in the off position. If it does, that tells you that the magnetos are grounding out, both of them, when the ignition or the magneto switch is put in the off position. So that's a magneto grounding check. That I had a comment in the last video that I did, and this is one of the reasons why I'm redoing the video. Evidently, I mean, he sounded like a pilot. He sounded like he knew his stuff. But he mentioned that essentially when you're checking the left and right magnetos during the run-up, you're doing a grounding check. You're grounding each one out. And yes, that's true. But that's not why you're not checking to see if each magneto individually will ground out during the run-up. That's not the purpose of the mag check. Though each magneto is grounding out, but only one at a time while the other's still running. There's no way to know that both magnetos have grounded unless you do the magneto grounding check that I've already shown you, going from both to off and back to both quickly. So, and there's no way to know that because we always shut the engine down by pulling the mixture to idle cutoff. So when you just turn the key to off, even if you pull the key out and you set it up on the dash, which is a common practice for safety, there's no telling for sure if there's a problem in the switch or possibly the P leads on the magnetos themselves. In other words, those magnetos, those self-contained generators that create high voltage could still be hot and you wouldn't know it. So that's the purpose in the magneto grounding check versus a mag check for the engine run-up portion of a before takeoff checklist. Those are two totally different things. I conversed with the guy in the comments and I explained to him, yes, you are grounding each one individually, but that's not the purpose in the run-up. The purpose of the run-up is not to check and see if each one is grounding separately, though that is a byproduct of information that you would be getting from checking each mag, because obviously to check one mag, the other has to be grounded, and then vice versa. So hopefully I've explained that pretty well, and I know that's a lot of information. It's just a little extra information. Has the magneto grounding check has nothing to do with the engine run up. This is just for you sim enthusiasts and that who you just want to know what pilots are doing in the cockpit, different things that pilots do that is not typical of flight sim operations. So now I mentioned earlier to go to the right magneto first and not the left. I see this in the in sim videos all the time. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not the best practice though, and this is another safety margin, if you will. So when you're doing this run up and you do a mag check and you go to the left, you go back to both, then you go back to the right magneto. I'm sorry, I went to off. Go to the right and then back to both. So the sequence there is left, both, right, both. Well, there have been many of pilots that took off inadvertently on one magneto, more commonly the left one, rather than the magneto switch being in the both position. So to try to avoid that, it's a good practice to check the right mag first. So you go from both to the right, so 2 clicks left, and then 2 clicks back to the right to both, then 1 click left, and then 1 click back to the right, back to both, after checking the left magneto. So again, it'd be right magneto first, oops, then back to both, left magneto, then back to both. What that does is that helps avoid you doing this. You check the left magneto, then back to both, then you decide you're going to check the right magneto. So you go 2 clicks, you see the engine RPM drop, it passes, and then you go 1 click back to the right thinking you've put it in both, and you've made it up in your mind that you've put the switch in the both position, but you really haven't. You're actually running off to the left. This is why you always check and make sure that the RPM recovers to the original RPM that you put it at as well. So it's a common practice. Most pilots that I have flown with, this is how they do it as well. So it's a pretty common thing. Most flight trainers are happy to explain that to you. And initially they might just tell you, check the right mag first, then back to both, and check the left mag first, and then back to both. And then eventually they'll explain why they want you to do it that way. It's just good practice. And it's a bit of a safety thing as well. So that's the difference between the magneto grounding check and the engine run-up mag check. So it's not an engine run-up mag grounding check. It's just an engine run-up mag check. You're checking the operation of each magneto individually. You're not checking to see whether or not they're grounding properly. Obviously, if you went to check one magneto and you got no engine RPM drop, then you would know that one is not grounding and you got a problem. And now you're going to have to go, speak with an AMP mechanic, airframe and power plant mechanic, aircraft mechanic, and find out what the deal is. But that's not the purpose of the run-up. It's not to check grounding. What I showed you before, going to the off position, yet again, that is a magneto grounding check. I think I covered everything that I wanted to cover in the commentary here. I gave you a little bit of safety theory on how to do the mag check. Like I said, you're not necessarily doing anything wrong by checking the left mag first and then the right. It's just good common practice as a pilot to check the right magneto first before the left. So that's all I got for you guys. No flying in this one. Hopefully you understood that from the very get-go. Hope everybody has a great day. We'll catch you later. Keep the blue side up.